Hello everyone, tonight we are continuing our descent into the abyss of true paranormal accounts. Stories sent from the shadowed corners of your own lives. If you have a story that whispers to you in the dead of night, a truth that refuses to be buried, you can send it to my Gmail. Now, a brief word before we begin. The coming months, until the heat of August breaks, will be demanding. The world of daylight requires much of me, and my time is stretched thin between my work and these sessions with you. The frequency of our meetings may slow. The silence between stories might grow longer. But I ask you not to be discouraged. Think of it as the quiet between heartbeats, the held breath before a scream. I often come home, the exhaustion of the day clinging to me like a shroud, and step directly into this room to give voice to these experiences. There are nights I don't feel like myself again until the witching hour has long passed. But your support, your presence here with me in the dark, is a powerful anchor. And I promise you, the stories are waiting. So many of them are still waiting. All right, the pleasantries are done. Let's get to the main event. Tonight, our journey takes us somewhere unexpected. Not to a mist-shrouded village in the old country, but to the bright, sun-bleached heart of the United States. It's a place many believe is sterile, modern, scrubbed clean of the old fears. A land of science and skyscrapers, where ghosts are just characters in a movie. But I want you to listen closely to this story. And when it's over, I want you to ask yourself, does progress build walls high enough to keep the dead out? Or does it just give them new places to haunt? Our first story is about a violation, a haunting that is not just spectral, but predatory. It concerns the ghost of a lecherous old man that has latched onto a nail salon, a place of vanity and vulnerability, and now torments the women who work there. This account comes from a listener whose uncle, well, call him Jimmy, is living it. Right now, Jimmy is still young, born in 1990. When he moved to America in 2015, the paranormal was the last thing on his mind. He was chasing a dream, a promise of a better life. Back home, opportunities were scarce, but a friend, Kevin, offered him a lifeline, a job at his family's large, successful nail salon in California. And so, Jimmy packed his life into a suitcase and crossed an ocean. His first day was a blur of impressions. The salon was huge, far grander than Head imagined. It wasn't just a row of chairs, it was a full-service spa. A sprawling main room buzzed with the sound of drills and conversation. Down a hallway were private, silent rooms for massages. There was even a comfortable break room for the staff. It was the picture of American success. But as Kevin gave him the tour, a cold thread of unease began to weave itself through Jimmy's excitement. On the walls, in every single room, affixed to the pristine, painted drywall was small, religious icons, crucifixes, statues of saints weeping plastered tears, framed prayers in languages he didn't recognize. Not one or two, like you might see in a home, but dozens. They were clustered in corners, above doorways, beside mirrors. It was a silent, desperate siege against something. This wasn't a village temple. It was a California spa. The sheer number of them felt less like devotion and more like defense. He found Kevin by the polished display, the rainbow of colors seeming garish and loud next to the disquiet growing in his gut. "Hey," Jimmy began, trying to sound casual. "What's with all the decorations?" He gestured vaguely at a nearby crucifix. "Why are there so many in every room?" Kevin didn't even look. He just shrugged. A gesture that was a little too quick, a little too dismissive. "It's nothing." "Man," he said, his eyes scanning the appointment book. "Place is a gold mine. Competition around here is cutthroat. The other salons, they get jealous. We've had people try to put curses on us, black magic, that kind of stuff. The charms are just, for good luck. Keep the business safe." He finally glanced at Jimmy, a tight smile on his face. "Don't worry about it." Jimmy let it go. What else could he do? This was America, the land of logic. Ghost stories were for the old country, for nights spent huddled around a weak fire. He was here to work, to build a future. For the first few nights, sleeping in the small staff quarters attached to the salon, his sleep was deep and dreamless. The icons on the walls faded into the background. Just another strange American quirk. And for a while, life was normal. The days were long, filled with the scent of acrylic and the chatter of clients. Then, one sun-drenched afternoon, everything changed. An American woman came in for an eyebrow waxing. All the technicians were swamped, so she was shown to one of the private rooms to lie down and wait. A small, quiet room with a massage bed and a single, staring crucifix on the wall. 15 minutes passed. A technician freed up and was walking toward the room to get her when the door flew open with a bang that echoed through the entire salon. The woman burst out, but it wasn't a walk. It was a panicked scramble. A scream was torn from her throat. A roar. Animal sound of pure terror. Her face was a waxy, bloodless mask. She clawed her way through the salon, knocking over a polished display, and slammed through the front door, her screams trailing behind her as she ran down the street. She didn't stop. She just ran, glancing back over her shoulder as if the devil himself were snapping at her heels. Jimmy saw the whole thing. The chaos, the dropped tools, the shocked faces of the clients. He saw something else, too. The older employees, the ones who had been there for years, didn't look shocked. They exchanged quiet, knowing glances, a shared shadow passing over their faces. Jimmy's first thought was practical. A mouse, maybe a cockroach. He knew how some American clients could be about bugs. He went into the room Shed just fled. He checked everywhere. Under the bed, behind the small cabinet, in the corners. The room was spotless, hermetically sealed. There was nothing. No bugs, no mice, not even a draft. He came back out, a knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. What could make someone run like that? Asterisk. The incident was chalked up to a hysterical client, and the day moved on. But the memory of that scream lingered in the air. About a week later, it happened again. This time, it was a Vietnamese woman, there for a facial. She was led to the exact same room. A few minutes later, the same scene replayed, but this time it was worse. She didn't just scream, she came out fighting, sobbing. Her words are furious. Terrified torrent. Because she spoke Vietnamese, the manager could understand her. She grabbed the woman's arms, trying to calm her down. "I was just lying there," the client cried, her voice shaking with a rage that was barely holding back hysteria. My eyes were closed, waiting. I felt someone come in the room. I thought it was time for my massage. But then this times he lifted up my skirt. He put his hand on my inner thigh. He was touching me. She was practically incandescent with fury and disgust. I screamed and my eyes flew open. I saw him for just a second. I saw him. He was huge, tall, like he was touching the ceiling. And when I screamed at him, he just melted. He dissolved into the corner of the room and was gone. She was sobbing now. His face, it was dark and covered in thick, black hair, and he was grinning at me. The manager and the other employees flooded the room, looking for an intruder, a pervert who had somehow gotten in. The room was empty, locked from the inside, but it wasn't just empty. It was cold, an unnatural, penetrating cold that felt like it was coming from inside your bones. Jimmy went in too, and the moment he crossed the threshold, the hairs on his arms stood straight up. It was like walking into a meat locker, an oppressive, dreadful chill that had no source. The next morning, the salon owner sat Jimmy down. The pretense was over. "What is going on in that room?" Jimmy asked, his voice low. 2 weeks. 2 different women run out of there screaming for their lives. "Is this place haunted?" The owner let out a long, weary sigh, the sound of a man who had been holding a secret for too long. "A long time ago," he began, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "This building was a restaurant. The man who owned it, he got into trouble with a local gang. One night, they came for him. They murdered him and his son, right here, in this building." He told Jimmy that after the murders, the building became poison. Business after business failed. A dozen different owners tried to make a go of it, but none lasted more than a month. They all fled, packing up in the middle of the night, breaking their leases. He didn't know all the stories, just that the building had a reputation for driving people away. But for some reason, the owner continued, a strange mix of pride and fear in his voice. "When my family opened this salon, we were an instant success. Money poured in from day one. I think the spirits here approve of us. They like the business." He admitted that the previous tenant had practically given him the building, selling it for a fraction of its worth, desperate to get out. "In the beginning," he said, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I used to sleep here sometimes, to save money. I never saw anything. But one night I was taking a nap on the bed in that same room. I had this feeling like I was being lifted. I felt weightless, like I was floating on a cloud. I opened my eyes. His own eyes went wide with the memory. Jimmy! I was hovering. I was a few feet above the bed, looking down at it. And then, just like that, I dropped. I hit the floor so hard, I thought every bone in my body had shattered. I've never slept here again." He and his wife now manage the salon from home, watching the place through a network of security cameras. He told Jimmy to watch the footage with him sometime after closing. He described what they saw, night after night. Manicure chairs sliding silently across the polished floor in the empty dark. Bottles of nail polish launching themselves off the shelves, shattering against the opposite wall. And in the break room, the same room where the two women had been terrified they would see it, a tall, shadowy figure. Impossibly tall, at least 9 or 10 feet, pacing, back and forth, all night long. He also told him about another figure, a different one, that they'd see on the exterior cameras, pacing outside the front door, as if it wanted to get in but couldn't. "We know this place is haunted," the owner concluded, his voice flat with resignation. "But the business is too good to give up. So we make offerings. We put up the charms. We try not to anger them. Then he told Jimmy the worst part, the part that made Jimmy's blood run cold. The spirits, especially the tall one, targeted the women. Only the women. The female employees were relentlessly tormented. It was worst in the bathroom. They'd go in, and the lights would suddenly click off, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. And in that blackness, they would feel times a presence, squatting on the floor next to the toilet. They'd hear it, the sound of heavy, wet, ragged breathing, and then the whispers would start. Low, guttural whispers in a language they said sounded like Spanish. Words they couldn't understand, but felt the meaning of filthy, predatory, and vile. The harassment was so constant, so terrifying, that female staff never stayed long. They were always hiring. But the men, the owner said, looking Jimmy straight in the eye, it never bothers the men. Not once. Jimmy was terrified. But the money was good. The life was stable. He had crossed an ocean for this. So he stayed. He worked his shifts. Tried not to think about it. Tried not to look too closely into the dark corners of the salon after the sun went down. For years, he has worked there. A silent witness, breathing in the scent of acrylic and decay, knowing that he is sharing his workspace with something ancient, something enormous, and something that hates women. Our next story pulls us from the sterile chill of a modern haunting and plunges us into the humid, tangled roots of the old world, a world of folk magic, blood curses, and a jealousy so profound it sought to poison an entire family tree. The listener who sent this says it is the absolute truth of what happened to her aunt's family. More than 30 years ago, her aunt and uncle married impossibly young. At 18, they had nothing but each other and a capacity for backbreaking work. They carved a life out of sheer will. The uncle fished through the night, wrestling a living from the dark waters, and the aunt would take his catch to the market at dawn, her voice raw by day's end from haggling. Year after year, they saved every coin. And finally, they had enough. They built a small house with their own hands and bought 5 acres of land from the uncle's mother. It wasn't a mansion, but it was theirs. It was a kingdom. And that was when the darkness found them. The moment they achieved this small piece of the world, the uncle began to change. It wasn't gradual. It was like a switch was flipped in his soul. The hard-working man his wife knew vanished, replaced by a paranoid, erratic stranger. He stopped fishing. He would just sit in the house they'd built, staring at the walls, muttering nonsense. His eyes, once clear and focused, became cloudy and wild. He began to accuse his wife of the most monstrous things. He claimed that when the moon was full, she would climb onto the roof of their home and transform, her body twisting into that of a demon, howling at the stars. The aunt was shattered, her heart broken. Her home now, a place of terror. She would often flee in the dead of night to her mother's house, his insane screaming chasing her through the darkness. They took him to a mental hospital. He was gone for a month, but the doctor sent him back with a useless diagnosis of a weak nervous system. He wasn't insane, they said. But when he came home, the madness returned. Worse than before. He developed a new obsession. At night, he would go outside the large stone water cistern they used to collect rain, and he would talk to it. For hours, he would sit beside that dark, silent cylinder of water laughing and conversing with it as if it were his oldest friend. The aunt, desperate and terrified, sought out a local folk healer. The old man listened to her story, his eyes never leaving hers, and when she was done, he nodded slowly. "Your house," he said, his voice a dry rasp, "has been cursed. The ground it sits on is poisoned." He gave her charms, bundles of herbs and written prayers to place over the doors and windows. He came and performed a cleansing ritual, his chants filling the small house with smoke and power. And for a while, it worked. The cloud lifted. Her husband returned to himself. The paranoid stranger was gone, and the man she loved was back. But their savings were gone, too, drained by the hospital bills and the healer's fees. They were starting over, again, just as they began to breathe again. Just as a sliver of hope returned, the curse struck again, this time at their children, their youngest. A baby, not yet a year old, was suddenly racked by violent, terrifying seizures that left his small body limp and blue. A few years later, their middle child began to show the same signs of mental decay that had afflicted his father. He would have long periods of lucidity, followed by days of nonsensical rambling and wild, paranoid delusions. Only their eldest child, who had been raised primarily by the grandmother and had spent very little time in that house, remained untouched, a single healthy branch on a dying tree. The aunt heard whispers of a powerful root doctor, deep in the Mississippi Delta, a man who understood the old ways. She made the long, arduous journey. He listened to her story, his face impassive. When she was finished, he told her something that froze the blood in her veins. The curse was not placed by a stranger, he said. It was put on you by a woman, one of your own family, someone close, who watched you build your life and was consumed by a jealousy so black it curdled her soul. She used a powerful, hungry magic to bring ruin upon you. The healer's eyes were filled with a grim pity. The curse, he explained, had been laid too long ago. It had seeped into the soil, wrapped its roots around the foundation of their home. It had become part of the land itself. It was too deep to be removed. Your only hope, he said, is to run. Tear down your house, piece by piece. Leave that land, and never, ever go back. The middle son, the one with the troubled mind, was temporarily helped by a charm from the healer, but the relief was always fleeting. The madness always returned. The youngest son, the baby who had been seized by the curse, never recovered. He died when he was just 10 years old. His body wasted away by the constant convulsions until he was nothing but skin stretched over a fragile skeleton. His death was the final blow. After they buried their son, the aunt and uncle did as the root doctor had commanded. They dismantled their home, the symbol of their dream, now a monument to their nightmare. They moved to a new plot of land, near the aunt's mother. And the very moment their feet left the cursed property for the last time, something happened. The uncle's younger sister, the one they had always suspected, the one whose eyes held a flicker of resentment whenever they spoke of their success, suddenly fell ill. She developed the exact same symptoms, the same deep, paranoid madness that had stolen their middle son's mind. She began speaking nonsense. She had violent, screaming outbursts. And at night, the neighbors would see her, a lonely silhouette against the moon, climbing onto the roof of her own house to sing to the darkness. The curse, its intended victims having escaped, had recoiled. It had returned to its source. A chilling, perfect, and terrible justice. After they moved, the aunt and uncle finally found peace. The husband's mind remained clear. He returned to his work, and they lived a quiet, simple life. Their eldest son grew up strong and healthy, married, and made the aunt a grandmother. They never became wealthy, but they were free. They had outrun the darkness. This last tale is a short, sharp lesson, a story about the price of disrespect, told by the same listener who shared her aunt's harrowing story. A long time ago, her grandfather, who was a respected folk healer in his own right, was digging an irrigation ditch with a neighbor on a sweltering afternoon. As they worked, their shovels cutting through the dark, damp earth, they struck something hard. Not a rock, it was a hollow, brittle sound. They dug carefully and unearthed 3 human skulls, their empty sockets staring up at the unforgiving sun. The neighbor, a cynical, callous man, just laughed. A harsh, ugly sound in the quiet field. "Look at this," he sneered, kicking at one with his boot before picking it up. "Just a bunch of old coconuts." And then he did something that made her grandfather's blood run cold. He held one skull in each hand, and, with a wide, mocking grin, he knocked the 3 skulls together. Clack! Clack, clack. Asterisk, a dry, hollow sound, like a final, mocking rattle. Her grandfather was horrified. He snatched the skulls from the man's hands. He gently wiped the dirt from them, wrapped them carefully in a clean cloth he had in his bag, and carried them a short distance away. He dug a new, proper grave, laid them to rest, and said a quiet prayer over the disturbed earth, asking for forgiveness on the fool's behalf. A short time after that day, the neighbor began to suffer from a strange and terrible affliction. His hands began to tremble, a slight tremor at first, but it grew worse with each passing year. Soon, his head began to shake uncontrollably, a constant, violent palsy that never ceased. It was as if unseen hands were rattling him. Payback for the day he had rattled the dead. The affliction stayed with him, a constant, humiliating torment, until the day he died. The people in the community all whispered the truth. He had been cursed by the 3 spirits he had so foolishly mocked. The storyteller says that grave her grandfather made is still there, old and shrouded in moss. Every year, on All Souls' Day, her family still goes to clean it and light a candle. And she says the strangeness has never left that spot. At night, people report seeing eerie, glowing lights bobbing and weaving over the grave. And local fishermen have sworn on their lives they've seen 2 enormous frogs sitting by the water's edge near the burial site, far larger than any living creature should be. Their amphibious eyes glowing in the moonlight. They just sit there, watching, and if you try to get close, they simply vanish into thin air. A short story, but a long lesson. Be careful what you mock in the dark. You never know who might be listening. And that is where our stories must end for tonight. Before you go, please, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell me, what did you think of these tales? Do you believe a modern building can hold an ancient evil? Does a curse, once spoken, ever truly die? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, when we will gather again to listen to the whispers from the other side, I hope you all sleep well.